Hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face. For those unaware, I have changed up my filming setup for the most recent videos and going forward. Still working towards the whole live streaming thing. Stay tuned for that announcement when I start doing live streams. And yeah, let's get into this video's card. I'm not 100% certain, again, where I'm going with this. I pulled out the Picket Fence Million Little Things stamp again. Love it. It's so big. Big florals. Can you go wrong? Really? Love it. So I pulled that out, and I've pulled out some Distress Oxide inks, and I just, again, ideas kind of like simmering in the back of my brain. So stay tuned, keep watching, and we'll just see what happens. So obviously I figured out what I was gonna do. And I started off with my MISTI and my stamp and stencil mat just to hold my cardstock in place, because I had a feeling I'd probably have to restamp this a couple times. And I'm using Distress White HEAVYSTOCK here. And this panel of cardstock is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So that just gives you an idea of how big this stamp is and why I love it. Again, large florals, always a win. So I am inking up the stamp with Black Soot Archival ink. I rarely use Archival inks. I just generally will use like my VersaFine Onyx Black or Nocturne. The VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink is what I generally will use when I'm doing like watercolor, anything other than like alcohol-based markers, basically. Yeah, I need to start using. I think I bought the Black Soot Archival along with the other ones. I have the little ones that Tim Holtz released because, like I said in a previous video, it's like, you know, Tim Holtz releases something new, add to cart. Anyway, the thing though with Archival inks is they kind of resist things in a sense. I need to go back and watch some of Tim's videos that he's done specifically on the Archival inks, because there's some really fun techniques you can do with them. Anyway, great detail. The one thing to note, if you've never used Archival inks, they will stain your stamps no matter what you do. It's just the nature of this type of ink, because it's Archival. It is, you know, it's acid free, permanent, waterproof, all the good things. I use my Simon Says stamp ultra clean spray. I use this always to clean my stamps. I've shown this in other videos, and I have this little Studio Katia like little microfiber heart that's what I use to clean my stamps. I spray one side with the cleaner, and then either I'll spray the other side with a bit of water, because ultra clean does have like a residue, kind of an oily residue. That's why it cleans stamps so well. But I can't stand the feeling of it. But it is, you got, you know, things to remove from your stamps. Ultra clean all the way. That said, Archival will still stain your stamps. They'll still stamp fine. It'll be fine. It's fine. You'll get over it. Trust me. I did. Been using, you know, photopolymer stamps for how many years now? When they are stained, they are well loved. It's all good. So, cleaned my stamp, set everything aside, laid out my media mat, and pulled out some Oxide inks. I'm actually not going to use the seedless preserves for this. I ended up just sticking with picked raspberry and peacock feathers and mowed lawn. And I have my little, what I call my ink smushing sleeve here. You could use a piece of acetate, you know, just any flexible, a little bit of like recycled packaging works too. I used this sleeve for so long. I keep it with my MISTIs and my tools and things, and this is what I use it for. So I have no problem doing ink smushing the standard way, like smushing it right on the media mat, you know, flipping my backgrounds, whatever, onto it and picking up ink. Using a sleeve or a piece of packaging, it just gives you a little more control where you're placing the ink. And for something like this, it comes in really handy because I could deliberately place my colors where I wanted them. And yet I'm still getting, you know, splotchies and little ink bits outside of the lines, which is exactly what I want. You know, so it gives you that look of the splatter and a little bit of chaos, but you have way more control, which I know a lot of you, I get it. I like having the control too, but trust me, just have fun with it. So I started with picked raspberry, and I had smushed that onto the sleeve, sprayed it with some water, and then pressed it down and kept it more concentrated to the two big flowers in this image. And then still added, you know, little splotchies and splatteries here and there around it. And then I dried it with my heat tool. That was why I removed this piece of cardstock from the stamp and stencil mat. I had dithered there in the beginning because I was like, oh, should I just leave it on here because it holds it in place? But I was planning on using heat, and that mat is not heat safe. So I will flatten this out when it's done, and I'll show how I did it. But anyway, I dry in between colors because wet on wet blends, wet on dry layers. And I don't want all of these like just blending into a blob. I want the you know, the splotchiness, the little splattery bits, and I don't want everything like fully mixing. So my second layer was the peacock feathers, and I added that to the other flowers, and then, you know, smushed it here and there to get the little splattery look. And again, use my heat tool to dry this. And then I'll go in with mowed lawn, smush some of that onto the sleeve, and in between the colors, I'm just wiping the sleeve off with just like a baby wipe, and then using a cloth to dry it, and then just repeating the process with the next color. So mowed lawn, smush that onto there, sprayed it with some water to get the little beads of ink, and then I'm going to smush this all over the greenery on this image. And I nearly stopped here because to me, this looks great. I was having fun. I love how it looks because it's still, you know, loose and a bit messy, but the color is, you know, somewhat contained. You can obviously tell, you know, those are pink flowers. The other ones are kind of blue colored, greenery, you know, it works. I was also using my finger here and there. Why not? You know, dabbing that in the ink and then just dabbing it in the spots where I just wanted more little splotches of ink to be. And again, could totally leave it here. I like this. I was happy with it. But I was like, I wonder. And I was like, I could go in with like Copics. I know people have done that. I've seen cards like that because and those ones always throw me off because it's like, how'd you get that splatter effect? And yet, you know, the intensity of the colors, all the different things. So I thought about that, and then I was like, or my Spectrum Noir Tri Blends could go over and like color everything in with that too. But instead of that, I was like, I'm just gonna try regular distress inks, because regular distress inks are transparent. Oxides are not. They have pigments to them. They are more opaque, as you can see here. And I wanted to be able to paint with the distress inks and yet not fully disturb all of this splotchiness I've created. So this was an experiment. I wasn't 100% sure because oxides were, even though I've dried them, they're still water reactive, you know. But because I've heat set them, they are set in a little bit more. And I didn't want to lose all that detail and splotchiness, you know, that I'd created. So I just smushed the same colors of distress inks. So I used the picked raspberry, the mowed lawn, the peacock feathers. I added some mustard seed because that's what I wanted to add to the flower centers. And then I also added a little bit of rustic wilderness to add to some of the greenery because rustic wilderness is just chef's kiss. One of my favorite colors. So I started with just my water brush. You know, I mushed my little distress inks onto the medium mat, and then I'm just picking them up with my little detail water brush. And I started with the flower centers, and then I started doing the picked raspberry on the main flowers, and love it. This was so fun. It just, yeah, gives it that extra, you know, layer and depth of color. And yet I've still got splotchy little bits here and there peeking through the distress ink. And I purposely didn't go over this. I've sped this up in editing. This is faster than I did it, but I purposely didn't add, you know, tons of water. I'm not going to go back in and add like layer and layer and layer because I don't want to work up all those little splotchy bits. I was liking them. So I did the picked raspberry on the big flowers and then peacock feathers distress ink on these smaller ones. And then for the greenery, I'm going to do the mix of mowed lawn and a bit of the rustic wilderness. And I'm even going to mix a little bit of the mowed lawn with the peacock feathers for some of it. Because there's, you know, different shapes of leaves. And that's a fun way to break up. You don't want all the greenery to be the exact same shade. That gets boring. So, yeah. And because all of this like splotchiness was there, this is also a nice way to if you struggle with the whole messy watercolor thing, because I did. In the beginning, I did. I used to love watching, like seeing other people's creations, watching their videos. I was like, how do you do this? Like, I don't understand. And then I just started to play, you know, and the more I do it, the more practice, the more, you know, you get comfortable with it. It just gets fun, honestly. And I love it. I love messy watercolor. But anyway, doing it like this, like doing the layer first with the ink smushing and everything, that I recommend it. If you have struggled, you know, playing around with like messy watercolor, do that first and then paint, you know, because you don't have to worry about it. It's like the splotches are already there. The splatters are already there. Things have already gone outside the lines. So now all you need to do is just slap a bit of color on and you're good to go. So when it was dry, I showed there, it was still very warped between the water and the heat and everything. This is what I use my mini mink for. You know, I use this more for flattening things out than actually foiling. But it's handy. Another option is like set it underneath something heavy for a good chunk of time to flatten it out. This is just the fastest way, is running it. Another thing is you can put your panel between just some clean pieces of like copy paper and run it through your die cut machine without a wafer die. That will flatten it as well. So I just ran it through my Mink in the little carrier sheet, and I have a piece of like parchment paper in there. Just, I don't know, it's been a habit. And that flattened it out. And then I pulled out the Picket Fence double stitched layering rectangle dies. And I didn't use any of those. I just used the sentiment that comes with this big hello sentiment because it's just one of my favorites. Those wafer dies, though, I've used in many videos when I actually do 5x7 cards. Wasn't doing that this time, so I didn't use them. And I die cut this hello from a couple scraps of white cardstock. And then the top layer I cut from some Altenew Dazzling Diamond cardstock, which is, this is also Chef's Kiss. I haven't pulled this out, I think, since when I was doing my Christmas series. And I'm just reminded again of how pretty it is. So adhered the layers together with craft tacky glue. So I've got some dimension and it's sparkly and fabulous and I love it. So I've got my sentiment, and then I decided I wanted to stamp one of the sentiments from the Million Little Things stamp set. So I just stuck this in my mini MISTI because the big stamp's actually still in my other MISTI. And lined up the sentiment there onto this panel, and I'm going to stamp that with that Distress Black Soot Archival ink because it's sitting here, and why not? So inked this up and stamped it a couple times right onto this panel. And then after that was stamped, I got out my card base, which is going to be a top folding A2 white note card. So 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and pulled in the big MISTI again. And I've got my stick and stamp mat, stuck the card base to that, took some Post-it tape to mask off where the score line is so I don't stamp past the score line. And the stamp's still in the exact same position, so it'll be in the same spot on the inside and outside of the card. And then I've shown this in many videos. It's been a while since I've done this, but I've shown this many times. Inking up my stamps either with blending brushes, or I've also done it with the Ranger blending foams because I've got all those for my oxides as well that are fully saturated with oxide ink. Applying the ink that way to my stamp. This way I can get multiple colors. I am not worried about it being perfect. It does not matter. And besides the fact that that's one, perfection is overrated. 2, it would take forever to try and get the ink exactly, you know, there's a ton of little lines in this image. But that's also perfect because it's a lot to give the detail to. So I just applied the picked raspberry oxide ink with a blending brush to the large flowers, the peacock feathers to the smaller ones, the mowed lawn to the greenery, and then I just took a smaller brush with mustard seed oxide ink and applied that to where the flower centers are. And because I'm using oxides, there's no need to rush. I just added this. It didn't take very long to ink it up, but you don't need to rush. It's just going to sit there on the stamp, and then I stamp that onto what will be the inside of the card. And yes, I will write right over this. This would also make a card front. You know, you could totally do this technique, stamp it, add a sentiment, do an entire set of these. You know, it would make a great little gift set. But I also like it on just the inside of the cards. So stamp that onto the inside of the card. And I removed the stamp and stencil mat and then just put the card base back in my MISTI here so I can stamp another one of the sentiments from that same Million Little Things stamp set. and lined up the sentiment, and then I'm going to stamp that with that Black Soot Archival ink as well. So I'm going to ink that up and stamp that twice, so I get all of that detail on the inside of the card. And after I did that, I'm going to adhere the main panel to the card base, again with craft tacky glue. I decided not to cut this down, so this is going to completely cover my A2 card base. So craft tacky glue on the back of this. I'm going to stick this onto the card, and then I'm going to stick a couple of my big acrylic blocks on top of it, just to give it a couple minutes to get everything adhered. And then once that's adhered and in place, I can then adhere my die cut hello sentiment to the card front. And then of course I'm going to add a little bit of bling as well. So adhere the sentiment also with craft tacky glue. And then my just current little obsession is the Pink Fresh glitter drops. This is the Lagoon color, which it's like the perfect match to peacock feathers. So got the sentiment adhered, and then I'm going to add just a little bit of bling. Nothing too crazy. I didn't add extra splatter this time. It didn't need it. You know, I got a lot going on with the painting and all the ink smushing I did in the beginning, glitter sentiment, little embellishments. One of the very few times I will say like splatter wasn't necessary. Could you add it? Totally. It'd be great. But this was good. I was content with how this turned out. So adhered the little bits of bling into place with craft tacky glue. And once I did that, this card is complete. So as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. In my blog post, I'll have the images. I'll have picture links to all the supplies I used. You can always access that in the description box below the video. In the description box, I'll also have a supply list with links to all the supplies I used, links to my social media. All of that info is directly below if any of you are interested. And thank you all so very much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't. I would love to have you. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.